Hey, just getting started on tearing this thing down, getting ready to put in the new Trailtech Vapor instrument cluster. Got it peeled off. Found out that a little bit of slop I felt in the front end bouncing down gravel roads. Need to do the steering head bearings. Got a little bit of play in them. Was looking at how much I wanted to dig into the wiring harness, removing extra stuff that I'm taking off. And on the very first thing, down here on the tail light assembly, this wire here was so kinked in the factory harness that it had broke the insulation, and the wire, when I touched it, came apart. So I've got to solder in a new piece from here down to this connection here. It's just the power line for the license plate light, but what if that had been to the CDI box, bouncing down the road and lose power? So I'm probably gonna peel everything apart just to check everything to make sure, because that's not a good start. I am still out here in the garage at it. I'll show you what I've taken out so far. Most of that wiring is for turn signals and safety switches, because I had all the safety switches bypassed already. This is the diode trio assembly. This side of it went to the safety switches. It needed to be grounded, and I'd already bypassed that, had that run to a ground. The other side, 3 red wires, 1 for each diode, goes back to a single wire there that goes to the CDI box. Now that I'm in here, I'll just ground the CDI box straight and eliminate the diode trio. Got turn signals, the back, turn signals from front. There's the old gauge. Here is the flasher unit out of there. Don't need it anymore. Looking at this, it's pretty much stripped down, going well. Some of the stuff I don't like about factory wiring. See how that wire's kinked? There's a lot of that. There's another one there. They just, however they need to do it, they just twist them up, stick them in there, tape them up. And for the most part it works, but that's what happened to that light in the back. Being exposed to a little more stuff, it had come apart. One I've out there marked green, that's that red wire. I'll need to ground it at the end, somewhere along the line. That lets the CDI box fire everything up. I had already bypassed the secondary solenoid that was over in this area. I did that first day I had the bike. And most of the rest of this will stay there. Where'd it go? Oh, here it is. This that I mentioned earlier, that's the fan relay. Got to keep it. Fuse for the fans down there. So I'm going to work on it a little more tonight. Probably address the wires that went up to the instrument cluster, because most of those I don't need anymore. I just want to keep the power wire out of it to hook up to the Vapor. So I'm going to get back at it. We had a bit of really good luck here. I'm setting up the coolant temperature switch for the Vapor. And I was hoping it would work out like this. But here is the sensor out of the head, the factory sensor. And it is the same thread as the new sensor for the Vapor. So instead of having to add this into your coolant line here, we can just screw this right into the head where the factory sensor was. So it'll work much better. The problem with mounting a sensor here is that you see I've got a thermal bulb on here, so it recirculates the coolant. But the normal thermostat is under this housing, and the only time you would be getting coolant on your sensor is when the thermostat opened up. So your temperature would be fluctuating. It wouldn't be a constant temperature reading of actually what's going on in the engine. And that was the problem without the thermal bulb. They did fluctuate a lot. Now my thought was maybe have to screw in here But since it fits right down into the head, and with the thermal bob circulating coolant all the time, should get a nice consistent temperature and a nice consistent reading on the gauge. So don't, if you buy one of these, don't put this in the hose. There's no need to. I ran into one small issue putting the wheel speed sensor in. It had a bolt that was supposed to replace one of the rotor bolts, but there is absolutely no clearance down in there between those bolts and that caliper bracket. So that bolt stuck out too far. It would not work. So they had another small bolt that I drilled a hole in the rotor and still had to kind of countersink it in there. But it does work. Got a lock nut on the back. There it is. Lock nut and a washer. It's all out of the way and it does work. I do get a speedometer reading. Just took a little more messing around with it than I'd planned. There's also a little magnet that's designed to fit in a hole and it's got a E-clip on the back. Problem with it is the groove for the clip, well, it's not set up to go through something quite as thick as this rotor because you couldn't get the clip on it. But that would still be something you could use. You have to modify it, epoxy it, whatever you want to do to get it in there. Now, I also thought I had some kind of wheel issue because listen to this. That magnet is strong enough that is actually moving the brake pad. See if I can catch my finger in this frickin' thing. Yeah, it's just the brake pad clicking. I thought the bolt was still hitting, but no, it's just clicking the brake pad. There's always something. One final look before I button everything up. There's the gauge mounted in there. I built, instead of mounting it on the handlebars, I went ahead and built an aluminum bracket to set it up there in front. I didn't want it offset to avoid the ignition switch. Eventually I'll probably paint that bracket black to match the rest of it. Right now it's fine. Wiring is all tucked in behind. That will probably get straightened up a little better next time I have it apart. But I want to make sure everything, I like it. Everything works fine. It does articulate side to side, no problem. The speedometer line, I brought it down. New clamps there. New clamps there. And fastened it to the brake line. I just ran some black tape around this. The wires down here are pretty small. Try to keep them from getting snagged on something. I showed in the last video I had to run the different magnet. I went ahead and put a new Tusk stainless steel brake line I had on the shelf. Figured if I'm going to fasten it together, I might as well fasten it to the brake line that's going to stay on there. I did remove the headlight guard. It just blocks some light. I haven't really ever broke a headlight. If I break one on this, I'll get a better headlight. Back here, wiring set up, tucked out of the way. Down in that hole is the new sending unit, put right in where the old sending unit was. So everything worked out good. Didn't have to cut into the thermal bob or anything. So it looks pretty good. Should work good. Lots of real estate up here. Could end up putting something else up there if I need it. But I'm happy with it so far. I did fire it up. Everything works like it's supposed to on the bike, so I didn't screw any wiring up anywhere. The gauge works. I had to fire it up and run it to make sure the temperature gauge works. Tack worked because it's wrapped around the spark plug wire. And I just ran the power feed for the vapor from some of the wires that went to the factory gauge. I think they ran the lighting system, the backlights on the factory gauge. So that comes on with the key, just like it should. So, good to go. I'm going to sack up all my extra parts that I took off just out of curiosity to see how much it weighs. Where is that? Oh, the headlight guard. Like I said, this thing just, it blocks some light. Not really sure that it's necessary. The other thing that I have not put back on is the fork brace. Did some research on it. Some guys that, most of them, the mixed reviews on whether it does anything or whether you need it. Some of the guys that really race these say don't use them off-road. The forks need to do their thing, flex around, whatever. It works better. According to them, the only time that this thing should be on there is if you have like sticky street tires and you're super hard braking on the street. I just run it on the pavement just to get from one place to the other. So a little bit more weight, something that doesn't gather mud anymore. So we'll try it. If I notice a difference, I can always put it back on. I did do the steering head bearings. They were loose, not damaged, just needed some grease, tighten it back up. I took the forks apart. I was happy. I knew that the guy said that they had changed the springs. They do have progressive springs in them instead of the factory springs. I'd have probably went straight rate race deck springs, but progressives are fine. But they do have the gold valve emulators down in there. So that's another plus. So somebody has done quite a bit of work. The only thing that was wrong is I don't know who did the work on the forks, but the forks were severely low on oil. There's a little bit of difference between what race deck calls for as a level and what the factory book calls for. But these didn't matter which level you went by. These things were like 4 inches too low on oil. So, and the oil looked nasty. So I don't know if they just pulled it apart, dropped the pieces in, didn't change the oil, didn't set it or what. But now the oil level is set right. So we'll see how everything does.